Welcome to your first day, intern.
You think I'm the intern?
Aren't you?
No, but keep going. Wait, she's the new company chief. Now let's talk.
Interns used the south entrance. Imani Reed had one hand on the glass turnstile when the man in the charcoal quarter-zip stepped between her and the scanner. Behind him, Halcyon Mobility's Dearborn headquarters was waking by layers, badge readers chirping, forklifts whining beyond the production corridor, the air carrying a faint hot metal smell from the battery enclosure lab. Imani looked at the man, then at the reception desk where her driver's license and appointment confirmation were already waiting to be checked. "I'm scheduled upstairs at 7:15, she said. "My name is Imani Reed." The receptionist, a young woman named Tessa, glanced at her monitor. "I have an eye." Reed on the priority access list. Before she could say more, the man leaned over the counter and tapped the screen with one finger. His badge identified him as Brent Klein, Director of Facilities Operations. "That'll be the Executive Transition Group," he said. He looked back at Imani's navy work shirt, dark trousers, and steel-toe boots. His eyes paused on the canvas notebook tucked under her arm. Summer interns were told to report through South Security. Different roster. "I'm not on the summer roster." Brent gave her the patient smile people used when they had already decided a conversation was over. "Everybody says they were told something different on day one." He turned toward the woman approaching from the elevator bank. "Marcy, can you straighten this out?" Marcy Voss wore an HR badge clipped beside a silver company pin. She listened to Brent's explanation without asking Imani a question, then held out her hand. "Phone and ID, please. We keep personal devices outside the lab orientation until compliance clears you." Imani did not hand over the phone. "I'm not attending lab orientation. I have a transition briefing in the executive conference room." She opened her notebook and slid out a printed schedule. The first line read 7:15 a.m. Governance Transition, North Conference 4. The company logo sat at the top, followed by 3 initials and a document control number. Marcy barely looked at it. "Those templates are all over the onboarding portal," she said. Tessa shifted behind the desk. "Mr. Voss, the access queue does say North Conference." Marcy's expression tightened, not at Imani but at Tessa. "And you're not authorized to interpret executive scheduling." She lowered her voice. "Please stick to credentialing." That was the first moment Imani felt the morning move beyond a misunderstanding. She had spent 22 years around factories, supplier crises, failed launches, and men who confused confidence with competence. Mistakes happened fast in places like this. What mattered was what people did when an inconvenient fact appeared. She looked at Brent. "Scan my license. Check the appointment owner. That will settle it." He folded his arms. "Or we can follow procedure and avoid holding up everyone because one intern thinks her calendar is special." 2 men in matching intern badges had entered behind her. Neither was redirected. One walked straight to the main scanner after showing Brent something on his phone. Brent nodded him through without asking for the device or sending him to the south entrance. Imani watched the turnstile unlock, then close again. She looked back at Marcy. "Is the phone rule for everyone attending intern orientation?" Marcy hesitated. "It depends on assignment." "What assignment did you verify for me?" Brent exhaled through his nose. "This is exactly why we do orientation before people are allowed to wander the building." Imani almost told him. The words reached the back of her teeth and stopped there. At 10 o'clock, Halcyon's board chair was scheduled to introduce her as the company's new chief executive. She had asked for these first 3 hours without ceremony because she wanted to see the plant before people started performing for the CEO. She had expected guarded politeness, maybe a rushed supervisor or two. She had not expected to become a test case simply by walking through the wrong door while black, female, and dressed for a production floor. "Run the verification," she said. Marcy took the schedule this time, folded it once, and placed it behind the reception counter. "No, we're not delaying executive staff because you want special treatment." She pointed toward a row of chairs beside the security office. "Sit there until the intern coordinator arrives." Tessa looked down at her screen again. Her credential just changed. Imani turned. A red bar had appeared beside her name. Accessed manual hold. Brent had already removed his hand from the desk terminal. That, Imani said, looking at the screen, was your decision? Brent clipped his badge back to his belt. Now it's official. Brent's words bothered Imani more than the red bar. Official meant someone had taken an assumption and given it a place in a system that other people would trust later. She stepped closer to the reception desk. What reason did you enter for the hold? Brent glanced at Marcy. Failure to follow onboarding instructions. I asked you to verify my appointment. Refused direction twice. Imani looked at Tessa. The receptionist's hands were still over the keyboard, but she was no longer typing. Can you see who placed the hold? Tessa started to answer. Marcy cut in. She doesn't need to discuss internal security records with you. Then she turned toward the elevator bank, where a broad-shouldered man in a white shirt was walking quickly toward them. Good. Alan can handle this. Alan Pierce introduced himself as Senior Director of Corporate Services, though the title seemed unnecessary from the way Brent straightened when he arrived. Marcy gave him the story first. An intern had entered through the wrong checkpoint, challenged staff instructions, resisted device control rules, and insisted she belonged in an executive meeting. By the time she finished, Imani's printed schedule had become a document she produced, and her request to scan her license had disappeared entirely. Alan studied Imani for several seconds. Are you here through the university program? No. Contract placement? No. Then help me understand why you're dressed for floor access and trying to enter the executive wing. Imani felt irritation rise hot behind her ribs. She had chosen the boots because the morning agenda included the prototype line. She had chosen the work shirt because she disliked touring plants in clothes that announced she would never touch anything. Explaining either choice now felt like accepting a premise she had never created. My clothing isn't a credential, my appointment is. Verify the person who scheduled it. Alan looked toward Tessa. Who owns the appointment? Her eyes moved to the screen. The entry is restricted. I can see the conference room and priority classification, but the sponsor field is masked at my level. There, Brent said. So nobody here can confirm her story. That isn't what she said, Imani replied. Alan raised a hand. I need you to lower the temperature. She almost laughed. Her voice had never risen. What temperature? For the first time, Alan seemed uncertain. It lasted less than a second. The confrontational posture. We have executives arriving this morning, and I'm not going to have the lobby disrupted. 2 employees passed through the turnstiles carrying coffee. One glanced over, then away. Tessa did not. She reached beneath the desk for a small pad used to record temporary badge problems and wrote something on the top sheet. Imani noticed. Marcy noticed too. Tessa, what are you doing? Logging the hold time. Why? Because manual holds are supposed to include the initiating employee and the stated reason. Brent's face hardened. It's already in the system. Tessa swallowed. The audit view isn't showing a reason code, just the hold. That changed Alan's attention. Brent? The terminal froze before I finished the field. So complete it. Brent leaned over the keyboard. Imani could see only part of the screen from where she stood, but she saw him select a menu and type. A moment later, Tessa's expression shifted. What did he enter? Imani asked. Tessa looked at Alan before answering. Behavioral escalation. Imani let the phrase sit between them. It was broader than anything that had happened, and harder to disprove once it traveled beyond this lobby. Alan rubbed a thumb along the edge of his badge. Fine. Here's what we're going to do. Ms. Reed, you'll wait in the security room while we contact the intern coordinator. If she can't place you, you'll be escorted off-site and your access request will be reviewed. I am not entering a security room voluntarily. Brent stepped toward the side door. Then you're refusing another reasonable instruction. No. I'm remaining in the public lobby while you verify my scheduled meeting. Alan's expression closed. He tapped his radio and asked building security to respond for a non-compliant onboarding visitor. Tessa tore the top sheet from her pad before Marcy could stop her. She folded it once and slipped it beneath the keyboard. Imani saw that too. Across the lobby, the elevator indicator reached the ground floor. When the doors opened, Halcyon's general counsel stepped out, saw Imani beside the security desk, and stopped walking. The general counsel's gaze moved from Imani to the red status bar on Tessa's monitor, then to Alan's radio. "What happened here?" Alan answered before anyone else could. "Onboarding issue. We have a visitor refusing placement while we verify her program." Imani watched the wording settle into place. Visitor, refusing. Program. Each word moved the facts another inch away from what had actually happened. "My name is Imani Reed," she said. "I have a 7:15 meeting in North Conference 4. I asked them to verify the appointment before Mr. Klein placed a manual hold on my access." The general counsel frowned. He knew the name. Imani saw that much, but not recognition of her face. The transition had been handled through the board chair, outside counsel, and a narrow internal team. She had deliberately skipped the publicity photographs Halcyon's communications department had requested. He took out his phone. "Reed, spell the first name." Marcy stepped forward. "We're already handling it. I can see that." His tone stayed neutral. "I'm asking for the spelling." Imani gave it to him. He entered something, waited, then looked toward the elevator display. "I don't have access to the restricted transition calendar from this device. Corporate governance does." He turned to Alan. "Until they confirm, why is her building credential flagged for behavioral escalation?" Brent shifted his weight. "She repeatedly refused instructions." "She refused the security room," Tessa said. Everyone looked at her. Tessa's color rose, but she continued. "The hold was placed before security was called. Before that, she asked us to verify the appointment sponsor." Marcy's voice sharpened. "Tessa, you weren't part of the management conversation. I was at the desk." The general counsel held out his hand. "Show me the audit entry." Brent stepped toward the terminal. "It's not complete yet." "That's a problem." Not an answer. For several minutes, the lobby stopped being about Imani and became about the trail they had created around her. Brent had entered the behavioral code after the hold instead of at the moment he imposed it. No supervisor approval appeared beside the override. Marcy's device control rule was real, but it applied to visitors entering 2 specific engineering labs, not to everyone in onboarding. None of that proved who Imani was supposed to meet. It did prove that the story Alan had received was already cleaner than the record beneath it. Imani should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the old fatigue she had learned to recognize years earlier, when being correct still meant watching someone decide how much correctness she was allowed to use. She checked the lobby clock. 7:43. The plant walkthrough she had planned before the board introduction was gone. Alan seemed to notice the time too. "We're losing the morning over this. Counsel, unless you're taking responsibility for her access, I'm closing the matter. I'm telling you not to destroy or amend anything related to the hold." "No one said anything about destroying records. You just told me the entry was incomplete." Brent's mouth tightened. Alan turned to Imani. "Last opportunity. Wait with security while governance verifies you. Or leave the property and reschedule through the proper channel. My proper channel is the meeting already on your calendar. Then you're choosing to leave." "I didn't say that." Alan looked at Brent. "Deactivate the temporary request. Mark the visit denied pending review." Tessa stared at him. "That'll cancel the credential number." "I understand what it does." A soft confirmation tone came from the terminal. The red bar beside Imani's name disappeared, replaced by gray text. "Visit denied. Croc closed." Brent stepped back as if the screen had finished the argument for him. Marcy gathered Imani's printed schedule from behind the desk and held it out. "You can contact whoever invited you." Imani took the paper. The fold Marcy had made ran directly through the words governance transition. The general counsel looked at Alan. "I advised preservation." "And the record is preserved," Alan replied. "She simply no longer has an active access request." Imani put the schedule back into her notebook. Then she took out her phone. Not to call the board chair. She photographed the closed credential number, the time displayed on the lobby clock, and the manual hold screen still visible on Tessa's monitor. "Please preserve the access audit from 7:15 forward," she told the general counsel, "including edits, override timestamps, and badge terminal activity." Alan gave a short, incredulous laugh. You don't get to instruct our legal department. The general counsel did not laugh. I'm treating that as a formal preservation request, he said. For the first time that morning, Brent stopped looking satisfied. The general counsel, Nathan Cole, pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a secure messaging app. Nobody touches the access log until I say otherwise, he told Brent. No corrections, no annotations, no cleanup. Alan's expression hardened. Nathan, you're turning an onboarding dispute into a legal event. No, the preservation request did that. Nathan looked at Imani. I still need governance to confirm your appointment, but until then, the record stays exactly as it is. Brent pushed away from the counter. Fine. Preserve it. It'll show what happened. Imani watched him say it with the confidence of someone who believed a database would remember only the version he intended to leave behind. She had seen that confidence before in supplier investigations. People rarely thought of systems as witnesses until they learned how many small machines kept their own memory. Her phone vibrated. A text from Lena Brooks, the board chair, filled the screen. Where are you? We're holding the 8 briefing. Imani typed, lobby issue. Do not come down yet. She sent it before thinking through the consequences. Nathan noticed. Someone waiting for you? Yes. You may want them to confirm the appointment. Not yet. Alan gave a humorless smile. Of course not. The remark landed because a small part of Imani agreed with him. She could end the argument in seconds. Lena could walk into the lobby, say 3 sentences, and every posture in the room would change. But that was exactly what Imani had wanted to avoid. If they behaved differently only after discovering her title, she would learn nothing about what happened to people who could not summon a board chair. Still, protecting that test had already cost her the plant walkthrough, and now it was costing other people time. She called her younger brother instead. Darius answered on the second ring. You're calling me before 8. Either somebody died or you finally admitted coffee isn't breakfast. Despite herself, Imani smiled. Neither. She moved several steps from the desk, lowering her voice. Darius knew about the new job but not the unusual entrance plan. When she explained the morning in short pieces, he was quiet long enough for the battery lab ventilation system to cycle on behind the wall. You're staying anonymous on purpose? He asked. For a little longer. Why? Because they need to correct the process before they know who I am. That sounds noble. Also sounds like something you'd say right before making your own life harder. Imani looked through the glass wall toward the employee parking lot. Her mother had once spent 11 months contesting a payroll error at a hospital because every person in the chain assumed the person before them had checked. Imani had grown up watching her bring the same folder to the kitchen table, week after week, until an administrator finally opened the original timesheets. That memory had shaped more of her career than she usually admitted. I know, she said. She ended the call irritated with him, which was usually how Darius managed to be useful. When she returned to reception, Tessa was standing beside Nathan with the paper log she had hidden beneath the keyboard. Marcy's face was tight. I wrote the times down because the access console was lagging, Tessa said. The first hold was at 7:26. The behavior code wasn't entered until 7:38. Nathan compared the handwritten entries with his phone. That matches the system timestamps. Brent's eyes narrowed. She shouldn't be keeping unofficial notes about security events. Tessa looked at him. You told me last month to keep paper timestamps when the console stalls. He had no immediate answer. Imani felt the third piece settle into place. Not proof of intent. Not proof of discrimination by itself, but a contradiction that mattered. The justification used to defend the hold had been added 12 minutes after the hold existed. Alan looked toward Nathan. So someone completed a field late. That doesn't make the original decision improper. No, Imani said. But it means the reason you relied on wasn't the reason recorded when the decision was made. Alan's jaw worked once. You are still an unverified visitor. Before Imani could answer, Nathan's phone rang. He checked the caller and stepped aside to take it. At the reception desk, Brent reached toward the keyboard. Tessa put her hand over it first. Legal said freeze it. Brent stared at her. For the first time that morning, The employee with the least authority in the lobby was the one preventing the record from changing. Nathan listened without speaking for nearly half a minute. His eyes moved once toward Imani, then to Alan, and whatever he heard erased the last trace of uncertainty from his face. "Understood," he said. "Send the authorization packet to my secure inbox and copy the board secretary. I want the access control team included." He ended the call but did not immediately explain it. Alan folded his arms. "Well," Nathan looked at Imani first. "That was Lena Brooks." Brent's hand stopped inches from the keyboard. Nathan continued, "Governance has confirmed that Miss Reed was scheduled for North Conference 4 at 7:15 under the Executive Transition Protocol. Her credentials were generated through the board secretary's office, which is why the sponsor field was masked at reception." Marcy's lips parted. "Executive transition?" "Yes." Alan glanced at Imani's work shirt again, as though the fabric might finally explain something. "Transition for what?" Imani could have let Nathan answer. Instead, she opened her notebook, removed the folded schedule, and smoothed it against the counter. "At 10 o'clock, the board is announcing me as Halcyon Mobility's new chief executive." The ventilation fans beyond the wall kept humming. Somewhere near the employee entrance, a badge reader chirped twice because someone had scanned too quickly. Nothing dramatic happened to the building. That mattered to Imani. Brent was still Brent. The closed credential was still closed. The 12-minute gap in his log did not become different because her title had changed. Marcy recovered first. "Miss Reed, if we had understood who you were, obviously this would have been handled differently." Imani looked at her. "That's the problem?" Marcy blinked. "You had my name, my appointment, a priority access entry, and a receptionist telling you the room assignment matched. You didn't need to know my job title to check those things." Alan pulled his phone from his belt. "We should get the credential reinstated immediately." Nathan shook his head. "Not by editing this one." "Why not?" "Because it's now part of a preserved incident record." He turned his screen toward Alan. "Governance confirmed her identity. That resolves who she is. It does not resolve what happened here." For the first time, Alan seemed to understand that the morning had split into two separate questions. One had just been answered. The other had become harder. Nathan called access control and instructed them to create a fresh executive credential without altering the denied request. He then placed the lobby audit, the terminal history, and the associated security radio traffic under legal preservation pending an independent review. Brent would not be suspended on Nathan's authority, but his access to administrative badge functions was temporarily removed until facilities leadership reviewed the override. Alan started to object, then stopped when Nathan reminded him that preserving systems was different from deciding discipline. Tessa remained behind the desk, her paper log still in her hand. Imani turned toward her. "You did what the procedure asked you to do." Tessa gave a small nod, though she did not look relieved. "Brent's my director." There it was, the cost that did not disappear with a title reveal. Imani looked at Nathan. "Make sure she isn't moved, written up, or scheduled differently because she documented this. I can issue an anti-retaliation hold through legal and HR compliance." Marcy stiffened. Nathan met her eyes. "You were involved in the incident. You won't administer the review." A security supervisor arrived, carrying a temporary credential in a sealed sleeve. He checked Imani's license against the governance authorization before handing it over. The process took 4 minutes and required 2 separate confirmations. Imani appreciated that more than she would have appreciated an apology. She clipped the badge to her shirt. Alan stepped aside from the turnstile. "Reed, I think we should probably discuss this privately before the board meeting." "We will." He seemed to relax. After the plant walkthrough, his confusion returned. "You still want to do that?" Imani scanned the new badge. The turnstile unlocked with the same ordinary click it had given every employee before her. "Yes," she said. "But now I want to see more than the plant." Behind her, Nathan was already requesting the previous 6 months of manual access holds. By 9:10, Imani stood on the mezzanine above Halcyon's prototype line with a visitor helmet over her braids and the new executive badge against her chest. Below, battery packs moved between inspection stations on low carriers, while technicians checked seals and cooling channels. Alan walked beside her without his earlier confidence. Nathan stayed half a step behind, reading messages from legal preservation. Imani stopped beside a rack of red-tagged components. How many manual badge holds become visit denials in a normal month? Alan looked toward Nathan. Facilities can pull that. That wasn't my question. Maybe 8. 10. Nathan checked his phone. Access control says 43 manual holds in 6 months. 29 ended as denied visits. Alan frowned. That includes contractors who showed up on the wrong day. Good, Imani said. Then separate those from records changed after the hold. They continued toward a torque station. The line supervisor, Denise Harper, was explaining a delayed launch check when Imani noticed a technician measuring the some cooling fitting twice. Denise said a supplier gauge had been reading high by a fraction. Imani watched the technician place it beside a calibrated gauge. A measurement did not become reliable because a machine displayed it first. Someone still had to compare it against a control. Nathan understood before she explained. You want a comparison set. I want completed access cases reviewed under the same criteria. Alan stopped. You're talking about setting up employees. No, I'm talking about existing records. That's still hindsight. People make judgment calls at reception. Then the judgments should survive comparison. Alan lowered his voice. Your board introduction is in less than an hour. If your first act as CEO is a discrimination investigation based on what happened to you, leadership will call it retaliation. The point irritated her because it was not entirely wrong. She had spent the morning insisting process mattered more than status. She could not replace one shortcut with another, because she now held the title. Nathan said, independent compliance can scope it. You don't direct findings. Imani nodded. Do that. Keep it narrow, holds, timing of reason codes, sponsor verification, and outcomes. Alan studied her. And if the numbers show this was one badly handled visit, then that's what they show. They entered a glass-walled conference room above the line. Marcy sat with a compliance manager Imani had not met. Brent's administrative badge privileges showed as suspended on a monitor. Tessa was missing. Where is she? Imani asked. Marcy answered carefully. Reception coverage was adjusted. Adjusted how? She was sent to the south desk for the morning. Nathan looked up. Was that scheduled before the incident? Marcy hesitated. The south desk lost an employee to a medical appointment. Nathan pulled up the staffing roster. That part was true. Tessa's assignment, however, had been changed at 8:22, less than 20 minutes after she gave him the paper log. Imani felt anger rise, but she kept her voice even. When was the replacement request opened? The compliance manager searched the staffing queue and turned the screen toward them. 8:28. Alan stared at it. 6 minutes after she was moved. Marcy folded her hands. I'd need to review my messages. Do that with compliance present, Imani said. Nathan's phone buzzed. He read the new message twice. Access control finished the first comparison. 5 prior cases have reason codes entered more than 5 minutes after the manual hold. Alan's expression tightened. Same operator? No, 3 different operators. The answer unsettled Imani more than if Brent's name had appeared 5 times. A single bad manager could be disciplined. A habit shared by several people suggested the workflow itself had taught them where shortcuts were tolerated. Any common factor? She asked. They're pulling the credential records now. Imani looked through the glass. On the line below, the technician had placed the questionable gauge beside the calibrated one and was waiting for the readings to settle. Give independent compliance the files exactly as they existed before today, she said. No summaries. The compliance manager opened the first preserved case. Then we're ready to compare them. The first preserved case belonged to a welding contractor who had arrived 40 minutes early. His sponsor was unreachable. The receptionist documented 2 calls, and the hold remained unchanged until he left. Imani read the timestamps twice. That one makes sense. The second did not. A university researcher had arrived for a battery safety workshop with an active invitation, but her sponsor field had been restricted because the meeting involved unreleased test data. Facilities placed a manual hold at 8:04. The reason unable to verify affiliation appeared at 8:19, 3 minutes after her sponsor had replied to an internal message confirming she was expected. The visitor was still denied. Alan leaned toward the monitor. Maybe reception didn't see the reply. The compliance manager, Priya Shah, opened the archived notification trail. They acknowledged it. A small read receipt showed beside the sponsor's message. Nathan said, "That doesn't prove why they denied her." "No," Imani agreed, "so don't make it prove more than it does." That distinction mattered. The timestamps could establish what staff knew, and when they knew it. They could not reach inside anyone's head. Imani did not want an investigation built around guessing motives when the operational choices were already visible. Priya opened the next 3 cases. 2 had legitimate documentation problems. One involved a delivery driver who had entered the wrong loading gate and refused to move his truck. Another involved an expired contractor credential. But the 5th case followed the pattern from Imani's morning almost exactly. An invited visitor, masked sponsor, manual hold before verification, broad behavior language entered later, denial before governance responded. The archived reception note described the visitor as agitated and insistent. Nathan pulled up the security radio transcript. He asked 3 times whether they had called his sponsor. Alan sat back. "That can still be agitated." Priya looked at him. "It can. But the system has a field for refusal, threats, or disruption. None were selected." Imani crossed her arms. "What happened to him?" "Interview candidate," Priya said. "Senior controls engineer. He withdrew the next day. That gave the record a consequence beyond reception." Halcyon had spent months telling the board it could not recruit enough experienced controls engineers for the new line. Imani felt the pieces connect in a way she had not expected. A sloppy access practice was not only humiliating visitors. It might also be damaging hiring. Alan saw where she was going. "We cannot assume he withdrew because of the lobby." "I'm not assuming it." "Then don't turn this into a talent retention issue." Imani looked at him. "You keep arguing against conclusions nobody has made yet." He pushed his chair back. "Because I know what happens once this gets labeled. Every judgment call becomes suspicious." Nathan closed one file. "That's why Priya is running the review, not Imani." Alan looked toward her. "And you're comfortable with that?" Imani hesitated. An hour earlier she would have said yes immediately. Now she wanted the full dataset before the board introduction. She wanted names, outcomes, supervisors, every late code, and every denied visit. Wanting it did not make it appropriate. "No," she said. "I want answers faster than the process can responsibly produce them. So I'm not directing the findings." Alan seemed surprised by the admission. Priya turned the monitor toward them. "There is something we can test today without drawing conclusions." She had found the access control procedure used when a sponsor field was masked. The written rule required reception to send a verification request through a separate governance queue before imposing a discretionary denial. The queue kept its own immutable timestamps. "How often was that step used?" Imani asked. Priya shook her head. "That's the problem. Facilities reports don't include it." Nathan understood. "But the governance server does." Priya nodded. "I can compare every masked sponsor denial against the governance queue. If the required request wasn't sent, we'll know." Imani looked through the conference room glass at the prototype line below. The technician with the suspect gauge had finished the comparison. A red calibration tag now hung from the faulty instrument. "What do you want from this review?" Alan asked. Imani answered after a moment, "A system where the next person doesn't need the right title to get someone to check." Priya connected to the governance archive. The search returned 21 masked sponsor denials. Beside 14 of them, the required verification request field was blank. Priya did not interpret the number. She exported the 21 cases into a read-only review set and projected only the fields needed for comparison. Arrival time, sponsor type, manual hold, governance request, denial, and later edits. 14 blank verification fields looked dramatic on the wall screen, but Imani had learned not to trust drama created by a spreadsheet. "Pick 3 at random," she said. then walk them through the procedure as it existed that day. Priya selected cases from 3 different months. In the first, a visiting attorney had arrived for a confidential labor meeting. Reception could not see the sponsor, imposed a hold, but sent the required governance request within 2 minutes. The attorney entered 12 minutes later. Proper process, inconvenient but functional. The second involved an equipment vendor whose name differed from the purchase order by 1 letter. No governance request had been sent, but facilities had contacted procurement instead and verified him through the vendor system. Priya marked it as a procedural deviation requiring explanation, not an improper denial. Imani nodded. Keep it in the review. Don't call it misconduct. The third case took longer. A black graduate student named Andre Lawson had been invited by Halcyon's Advanced Controllers Group to present research on sensor faults. His sponsor field was masked because the session involved prototype data. Brent had been the duty manager that morning. The first hold appeared at 9:11. A note stating visitor became argumentative when questioned was added at 9:24. Andre was denied at 9:27. Priya opened the governance archive. No verification request existed. Alan leaned toward the screen. Was there another contact method? Checking. Priya searched archived messages, reception calls, and sponsor notifications. Nothing. The engineering host had sent an inquiry at 9:31, asking why his guest had not arrived. Reception answered that the visitor had failed access screening. Imani looked at Brent, who had been brought into the conference room with a facilities vice president and an employee relations representative. His administrative privileges remained frozen, but no disciplinary conclusion had been made. He stared at the screen. Do you remember, Mr. Lawson? No. Do you remember denying a university guest without submitting the required governance request? I handle hundreds of visitors. Priya nodded. That's why we're using the records. Brent shifted in his chair. If somebody is hostile at reception, we have discretion.
You weren't there. Tessa was.
At Nathan's request, she had returned from the south desk under a written anti-retaliation instruction. She sat near the door, visibly uncomfortable beside managers several levels above her. Priya asked whether she remembered Andre Lawson. Tessa looked down at her hands. Yes. Brent turned toward her. She saw it and stopped. Imani resisted the impulse to rescue her. If Tessa spoke, it had to be because she chose to, not because the new CEO turned her into a weapon against her boss. Priya waited. Tessa swallowed. He wasn't yelling. He kept asking whether we'd contacted Dr. Shu. Brent said we didn't chase executives for people who couldn't follow instructions. Brent pushed back from the table. That is not what I said. I wrote it down. You keep private notes on managers? Operational notes. Because the console was freezing, Nathan asked, do those notes still exist? Tessa nodded. The pad is in legal's evidence envelope. Brent looked at Alan. This is ridiculous. You're treating one receptionist's memory like a verdict. No one has issued a verdict, Priya said. We're testing the records. She moved to Imani's incident. The same procedural step was missing. No governance verification request had been submitted before Brent imposed the hold. The request appeared only after Nathan intervened. 2 separate visitors. Different months. Same duty manager. Same masked sponsor condition. Same missing verification step. Similar behavioral language entered after the hold. Imani felt the anger return, but this time it had somewhere useful to go. What remedy does the procedure allow when a required verification step is repeatedly skipped? She asked. Priya opened the compliance manual. Independent case review, temporary removal of discretionary access authority, retraining if the issue is procedural, and employee relations review if conduct concerns are substantiated. Imani looked at the facility's vice president. Then use those mechanisms and review every denied masked sponsor case, regardless of who the visitor was. Brent stared at her. So I'm guilty already. No, Imani said. You're finally being checked by the process you refuse to use on other people. Priya closed the case file and sent the preservation package to Independent Compliance. The formal review had begun. Independent Compliance issued its first action memo just after noon. 43 minutes after the board formally introduced Imani as Halcyon Mobility's chief executive. The announcement itself had been almost embarrassingly ordinary. No dramatic entrance, no public humiliation of the managers from the lobby. Lena Brooks read the board resolution, employees applauded, and Imani spoke for less than 5 minutes about manufacturing discipline, product reliability, and the difference between moving quickly and skipping verification. Then she went back upstairs. Priya had separated immediate safeguards from disciplinary findings. Brent was removed from visitor access duties and placed on paid administrative leave while employee relations reviewed the Lawson case, Imani's incident, and the other mask-sponsored denials. His badge still worked for approved meetings, but he could no longer alter access records or supervise reception staff. Marcy was not suspended. The evidence did not support that yet. Instead, HR's chief compliance officer reassigned her from the investigation and ordered a review of the decision to move Tessa after she documented the lobby timestamps. Allen received a written preservation directive and temporarily lost authority to approve discretionary visitor denials. He read that part twice. "You signed this?" "No," Imani said. Priya looked up from the memo. "I did under compliance authority." Legal concurred. Allen's eyes returned to Imani. "But you asked for the review." "I asked for the records to be checked. There's a difference." He seemed dissatisfied with the distinction, though he could not argue with it. The harder decision involved the 21 denied visitors. Several had legitimate reasons for being refused. Others did not yet have enough information to tell. Imani wanted every questionable denial reopened immediately, but Priya warned that contacting people before their cases were verified could create confusion and compromise interviews. "So we wait?" Imani asked. "We verify," Priya said. "Then we correct what we can prove was wrong." The answer was slower than Imani wanted. She accepted it anyway. By mid-afternoon, the first confirmed error was Andre Lawson's case. Governance records showed that his invitation had been active. The required verification request had never been sent. Nothing in the archived radio traffic supported the claim that he posed a security threat. Halcyon could not undo the morning he had been turned away, but the company could correct the record and contact him through an independent employee relations officer rather than the managers who had denied him. "What about his interview?" Imani asked. Priya shook her head. "We cannot promise him a job as restitution. The position was filled months ago." "Good. Don't manufacture a reward. Offer a written correction, reimburse his travel costs, and ask whether he wants his complaint reviewed formally." Nathan added, "And make clear he owes us nothing in return." Imani nodded. That decision cost her more politically than she expected. 2 board members called before 4, concerned that the new CEO's first day was being consumed by a facilities investigation instead of the supplier crisis she had been hired to manage. Lena did not pressure her, but she reminded Imani that a delayed battery contract review was scheduled for the next morning. "You can be right about this and still lose control of your first week," Lena said. Imani leaned back in her chair. Through the glass wall, she could see the prototype line slowing for shift change. "I know. Do you?" The question sounded enough like Darius that she almost laughed. She closed the access review file at 5:12 and handed operational ownership to Priya. That was the limit she had not wanted to accept. She could set expectations, protect the investigation, and demand measurable fixes, but she could not personally chase every injustice and still run the company. Before leaving, she returned to the lobby. A new sign stood beside both turnstiles. "Masked sponsor? Do not Denny before governance verification." Below it was a short escalation path with 2 contact points and a requirement to log the request before any discretionary hold became final. Tessa was back at the main desk. She scanned an invited contractor's ID, saw the masked sponsor field, and reached for the governance queue instead of the denial menu. The contractor waited. The system verified him 90 seconds later. The turnstile clicked open. 3 days later, the temporary sign beside Halcyon's turnstiles had been replaced by a laminated procedure card bolted to the reception console. A masked sponsor now triggered a yellow verification state rather than a red discretionary hold. Reception could still stop anyone whose identity failed to match, whose credential had expired, or whose behavior created an actual safety concern. What staff could no longer do was treat uncertainty itself as misconduct. Imani tested the change before the morning production meeting. She watched from the coffee kiosk while an outside accountant arrived for a confidential audit session. Tessa scanned his license, saw the masked sponsor field, and sent the governance request. No one asked him to surrender his phone. No one moved him into a security room. 4 minutes later, the sponsor confirmed him and the gate opened. Tessa saw Imani afterward. "You spying on us now?" The dry edge in her voice surprised a laugh out of Imani. "Quality assurance. That's what managers call spying when they have budgets." Imani took her coffee. It was the first normal exchange they had managed since the incident. Tessa's protection agreement had become formal the previous afternoon. Her schedule, performance reviews, assignments, and reporting line could not be changed for 90 days without compliance sign-off. She had also been offered the option to transfer away from Brent's organization. She declined. "I like reception," she told Imani. "I just don't like being punished for remembering what happened there." The independent review was still incomplete, but several findings had become clear enough for corrective action. 11 of the 21 masked sponsor denials had bypassed the required governance queue. 6 were ultimately supported by other legitimate access problems. 5 were not. In 3 of those 5, broad behavior codes had been entered after the initial hold. Andre Lawson accepted reimbursement and a written correction, but declined Halcyon's offer to reopen a recruiting conversation. His email contained only 4 sentences. Priya handed Imani a printed copy because Andre had permitted the company to retain it with the case. He wrote that he appreciated the correction, but he had already joined a smaller robotics company where the people interviewing him had been more interested in his research than in proving he belonged in the building. Imani read the final sentence twice, then folded the page. There were remedies an organization could make and losses it could only name. Alan asked to meet that afternoon without Nathan or Priya present. He stood near Imani's office window for several seconds before taking the chair across from her desk. "I keep replaying the lobby," he said. "Not the CEO part." Imani waited. "When Tessa said the hold reason had been entered late, I knew we should stop." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his employee badge, the same nervous habit she had noticed that first morning. "I didn't stop because Brent's explanation was easier to manage than admitting we might have mishandled somebody in front of half the building." "That doesn't explain why you called security." "No." Alan looked down. "That was me protecting the version I'd already accepted." It was not an elegant apology. Imani trusted it more because of that. She did not absolve him. His authority over visitor denials remained suspended pending final review, and he would complete corrective training with the reception and facilities teams rather than receiving a private executive briefing. He accepted both conditions. Marcy's review produced a different result. Compliance found no evidence that she had ordered Tessa moved in retaliation, but it did find that she approved the transfer without asking why it happened minutes after a protected documentation event. Her employee relations responsibilities were reduced while she completed remedial training and a 6-month oversight period. By Friday, every receptionist had a visible appeal path on the console. Every manual hold required a reason before activation, and every later edit generated a separate timestamp that could not overwrite the original entry. At the end of the week, Imani crossed the lobby carrying her steel-toe boots in one hand. Tessa was training a new receptionist on the yellow verification screen. "Don't guess," Tessa told him. "Send the request." The words were ordinary enough that nobody else looked up. Imani did. On her phone, a message from Halcyon's Cleveland facility waited beneath the supplier updates. Their site director had seen the new access procedure and wanted to discuss an older set of visitor complaints before adopting it. Imani left the message unopened for the moment and walked through the turnstile. 4 weeks later, Priya placed the final investigation report on Imani's desk at 7:12 in the morning. The hour made Imani notice the coincidence. Her first Halcyon appointment had been scheduled for nearly the same time, back when a red bar on a reception screen had been enough for 3 managers to decide the system knew more than the person standing in front of them. She opened the report before her coffee. Independent compliance had reviewed every masked sponsor denial from the previous 18 months, interviewed reception staff, compared governance requests with facilities logs, and examined later edits to behavioral codes. Brent had skipped required verification in 7 cases. In 4, investigators found that he added or expanded conduct descriptions after imposing the hold. Witness accounts and radio traffic contradicted 2 of those descriptions. Compliance did not claim to know every reason behind his decisions. It did conclude that he had repeatedly bypassed procedure, created inaccurate records, and treated challenges to his judgment as evidence of misconduct. Employee Relations terminated Brent's employment after the findings were reviewed by facilities leadership and legal. The decision was not Imani's to sign. Allen remained with Halcyon, but not as Senior Director of Corporate Services. The review found that he had relied on Brent's account despite visible contradictions, escalated Imani's case without independent verification, and authorized the cancellation of her credential after legal had warned against altering the incident trail. He accepted reassignment to an operations planning role with no responsibility for building security or visitor access. Marcy kept her HR position under formal oversight. Her 6-month corrective plan required documented review of retaliation risks, access to an independent employee relations advisor, and quarterly audits of staff transfers following protected complaints. The investigation could not establish that she moved Tessa to punish her, but it found that Marcy had failed to ask the question when the timing plainly required it. Tessa chose to stay at the main reception desk. She also accepted a new role helping test Halcyon's visitor access procedures, though she insisted the title not include the word manager. "I've seen what titles do to people around here," she told Imani. Imani laughed. "That sounds dangerously like management material. Don't ruin my morning." The larger repair was measurable. Manual holds could no longer activate without a reason code. Later edits appeared beside the original entry, rather than replacing it. Masked sponsors automatically opened the governance queue, and every denial involving an unanswered sponsor generated a compliance review within 1 business day. 3 months of audits would determine whether the changes stayed in place after attention moved elsewhere. 5 visitors received written corrections. 3 accepted reimbursement for documented travel expenses. Andre Lawson accepted neither another interview nor a public apology. Halcyon corrected his internal record and left the rest alone, as he requested. Imani respected that boundary. Her own first week as CEO had not disappeared into the access investigation. She had handed the review to Priya, spent the next morning on the delayed battery contract, and discovered a cooling system supplier promising production volumes its tooling could not support. Halcyon renegotiated the launch schedule rather than pretending the risk away. It cost 6 weeks and several uncomfortable board conversations. It also prevented a problem from reaching customers. On the first Monday after the final report, Imani entered headquarters through the same lobby in her steel-toe boots. A young black engineer stood at reception holding a visitor badge. The screen had flagged his sponsor as restricted. Tessa showed the new receptionist where to send the verification request, then kept talking with the visitor about traffic on I-94 while the system worked. 98 seconds later, the screen turned green. Nobody applauded. Nobody knew enough to understand why Imani paused. The gate simply opened. Upstairs, she found the Cleveland message she had postponed 4 weeks earlier. Compliance had attached 12 older visitor complaints from that facility. The issue was different. Not masked sponsors, but contractors whose technical certifications had been rejected after a software migration despite valid records. No one had concluded misconduct. No one had named a villain. There was only a process producing answers that did not match the documents people carried. Imani opened the first file, then set her boots beneath the desk. This time she would begin with the verification.